Hello friends, thank you for watching this video. I am Mohamad and today we're going to be discussing filters in our .NET web applications. We're going to be discussing how we can actually implement filters on a global level, on a controller level, on an action level. We're going to be seeing how we can actually implement async filters. As well, we're going to be seeing how we can manage the orders of those filters and how we can give them priority one over the other. If you like this video, please like, share and subscribe. It will really help the channel. As well, if you'd like to support me, please consider supporting me on Patreon or buying me a coffee. Now, grab your cup of coffee and let's get started. So before we get started, let us check what are the filters, how do they work, what is the execution process, and then we're going to basically start creating our middleware inside our code. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be checking a diagram which is provided by Microsoft, and we're going to be explaining it step by step from there. So now let us open up our web browser. And this diagram here is the diagram which is provided by Microsoft. And basically here we can see the process that a request is going to take. And we're going to be, what we're going to be able to see here is basically once a request hits our application, it's going to go through different middlewares. And basically what a middleware means here is our processes that are executing whenever the application starts up, and basically it will listen to all of these incoming requests before it actually reach out our action or inside our controller. So we can see here that we have different middleware available. And here could be any miscellaneous middleware that we have, either custom one or basically built in from Microsoft. Then it's going to go to the routing where it's going to specify where it's actually going to go. And then it's going to go to the action selection, and then it's going to go to our MVC action. So all of these, if you want to learn more about middleware, I have a different video where I delve much more deeper inside middleware, how do they work, the priority of them, so on and so forth. So I'm going to put this in the description down below, and I'm going to make it, linking it here somewhere where you can actually watch it. But as for the rest, now we can actually discuss. So what we're going to be doing here is similar to the middleware request. Filters have also this kind of priority. So basically we're going to have global filters, we're going to have some filters on our controllers, we're going to have filters on our actions, and then we can actually set the priority for every implementation for these filters and how are they going to be working. So now that we have covered the basic actions, or basically the basic idea behind filters, let us go back to our terminal and let's create our new application. Let's see how this looks. Okay, let's remove this, we don't really need it right now. And we're gonna put .NET new, we're gonna put web API, and we're gonna call it API, let's say API filter demo. Oops, API -n, and then I'm gonna go to cd API filter demo, and then I'm gonna put code and open it in Visual Studio Code. Perfect. So now that my application is open in Visual Studio Code, I'm just gonna open a new terminal. I want this, and all I'm just gonna doing is .NET new, .NET build. Okay, great. Now we can see my application is building successfully. So first things first is I'm going to open up my controllers, and we can see here that I have a weather controller which is available for me out of the box whenever I create a new web API, which we're going to be utilizing this in order for us to demonstrate different filter implementation. And we're going to be also creating another controller down the line, but for now this should suffice. So once we have done that, inside the root directory of my folder, I'm going to be starting creating these filters. And it's always good for us to separate these filters from the rest of our application. So what do I mean by that? So we create like a dedicated folder called services, for example, and inside the services folder we can create a folder called filters, and we can add all of the filters inside that folder. That way we can have like a dedicated section to them. So what I'm gonna be doing here is I'm gonna create a folder, and I'm gonna call this configurations. And inside the configuration folder, I'm gonna create another one, which we're gonna call filters. And then inside the filters folder, I'm gonna be creating my first filter. And my first filter is gonna be pretty straightforward. All I'm gonna be calling it is my filter. .cs. Pretty straightforward. Now, first of all, we need to put our namespace, and it's gonna be API filter demo .configurations .filters, and then it's gonna be public class my filter. And we're going to discuss this right now. So now that I've created my class, how will my application know that this class is going to be a filter? So lucky for us, Microsoft or the .NET framework provide us with a interface that we can actually utilize in order for us to inform our, or basically make our class a filter. And then what we have to do after that is we need to inject this into our program.cs, so it will basically be picked up whenever the application starts. So now we're going to be adding this interface, and then we're going to be injecting it into our program.cs. So inside my public class here, I'm just going to put iAction filter, and let us fix these references. And then here we can see it's complaining because basically it's saying that we did not implement this interface. So if we click on this, we can see that it will give us two different methods. And basically the first method here we can see is on action executed, and the other one is on action executing. So what does this mean? So it means one of them is going to execute whenever the request comes in. Whenever it is coming in, it's going to execute this, and once the request has finished executing, before it goes back to the user or basically to the person who called it, it's going to basically execute the second one. So this is the first one. Let's put them in order. So this one is gonna basically execute whenever the request is coming in, and basically on action executed, it's gonna execute once that request has finished executing and before it goes back to that user. So what we're gonna be doing here to make it pretty straightforward, we're gonna just create a console.writeLine, and I'm gonna be basically adding the thing. I'm gonna say this filter executed on, we'll put this name, and then let's copy this, and we'll put the same thing here, but instead of putting on executed, put on executing mode and executed. Okay, perfect. So now that we have created our very basic filter, we can see here basically what we're doing is we're basically attaching actions before the API endpoint is executed and after it has been executed. So what do I mean by that? So if we take a look at this weather forecast controller, we can see here that we have one get. And basically what we're going to be seeing here is before this, if we call this endpoint here, and before this is executed, we're going to be seeing this method is executing, and once this is terminated or finished, we're going to be seeing this method executing, and then we're going to be getting the result. So let us test this. But actually, before we do that, what we need to do is we need to inject this in the program.cs. And there's multiple ways where we can actually inject our filters inside our program.cs. And what we're going to be doing here is we're going to make it as a global controller. So what do I mean by that? So basically what it means is whatever actions inside my controller if I have 1, I have 10, I have 100, no matter how many controllers I have, this filter is going to be implemented to them. So I don't really have to go for every specific controller and specific action I need to implement it. What I'm doing here is basically I'm saying, like, for any different controllers that exist with actions, please add this filter to it by default. And this is what I'm going to be adding here. And in order for me to add this, I'm going to be basically adding more stuff into the builder.services.add controllers. And here what we can do is, first of all, is we need to add some options. And from here, I'm going to be able to actually add my filter. So first of all, I'm going to put options.filters.add. And then here it's going to ask me what is the filter that I want to add. I'm gonna say new, we call it my filter. Oops. And now let's fix those references. That's it. Now, because I have added this, so basically what I'm saying is whenever MVC is injecting the controller, it's going to also inject this filters, where basically it's going to allow me to add any filter that I want. And for now, I'm just saying that it needs to add my simple filter. And I'm going to do here is .NET build to make sure that, if I can type .NET build, make sure everything is building, we can see that I got build succeeded. Now once I have done that, let us just .NET run. And we can see it's running on port 5005. So let's open back my web browser. And I'm just gonna put it here, /swagger/index.html. And we can see here that I have my normal request. It's not really anything, but all I'm gonna be doing is I'm just gonna click on try it out and click on execute. We got our response. And if I go back to the logs, we can see that this filter has been executed on action executing, and this filter has been executed on action executed. So we can see that this actually happened whenever the filter, whenever we hit this endpoint. So I'm gonna try to add this console.writeLine. The action is being executed. And in theory, we should be able to see that this sentence should appear between these two filters. So let's stop this and let's run this again. And let's go back to Firefox here and let's execute this again. Execute. Perfect. And if you come here, okay, we can see that this action is being executed and then we got this filter is being executed. So let's give it a bit of a space so we can see it much more clearly. So let's stop this and let's run this again. And if we go back and execute this again, we can see that this is going to be the order. So before this action is being executed, we got this filter is executed, and then we can see if the action is being executed, which is basically mean this. And once that's finished, we can see that it actually executed again. So why do we need this? So there's multiple reasoning that we might need. I want to add a filter. It could be an authorization filter. It could be in order for us to verify user information. If we have some kind of header management or basically specific header utilization, we can utilize a filter. So for example, if we're expecting certain keys to be coming inside the headers whenever any of our clients do any requests, so we can implement a filter where we can actually pick up that header request, analyze it, make sure it's actually running or basically contain that information or not, and all of that before it actually hits the actual action. And basically the reason we might want to do that is basically in order for us to avoid having a lot of load on our application. So basically in order for it, before it actually reach our MVC part of our application, when if it has a filter on it, it can basically filter all of these requests, and basically it can remove a bit of the load. It could make our application performance much better. It could basically add an extra layer of separation of concern. So anything, for example, handling all of the verification, or we can basically extract it from our controllers and basically delegate it to a filter. So there's a lot of different scenarios where why do we want to actually utilize this type of implementation. And this is a very simple reasoning behind this, but there's a lot of good use case scenario why do we want to utilize a filter. So now that we have seen how a simple filter execute and how a simple filter will work, let us take this a bit step further and add much more functionality to it. So what I'm going to be doing right now is inside my controllers, I'm going to be creating a new controller. And for this, of course, I'm going to be calling it drivers controller, because everything has to have a Formula 1 theme. And here, first of all, I'm going to put my namespace, and I'm going to call it API filters demo.controllers. And then here's going to be, first of all, we need to give it the API controller attribute, and it's going to ask us, not now, let's add the other one. I'm going to put now the route, and then I'm going to put that this is going to be controller. And then what I'm going to be doing here is I'm going to put public class drivers controller, and it's going to inherit from controller base. Okay, perfect. So let me fix this. Okay, this is good. And what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to create a static list. So I'm going to put private static list of strings, basically very simple. I'm gonna call the drivers equal new list of strings, and basically I'm gonna add some drivers here. So it's gonna be Lewis, and then I'm gonna put George. I'm gonna put Valtteri. And let's put Carlos. And let's put Arden. Okay. So now that we have done this, now let us add a basic actions. So I'm gonna put HTTP get, and we're gonna give it a name. Gonna call it get drivers. I'm gonna make it as public. Action result get, and it's gonna be pretty straightforward. Return. Okay, and I called it, I think, drivers. Yeah. We're gonna add another one. We're gonna make it HTTP post, and I'm also gonna give it a name. And it's gonna be add driver. And then here we can say public action result post return. Okay, oops. Actually, it's gonna be, we need a string here for the driver. I'm gonna call it driver name. And all it's gonna be is drivers dot add driver name. And finally, we're just gonna return back the list. It's gonna be return, okay, drivers. Pretty straightforward, nothing really new or impressive here. So let's just stop this. Let us run this again to make sure that we have covered everything. Okay, it's running now. Let's go back to our web browser. Let us refresh it. We should be able to see it. And now if I click on get, we should be able to see that I got my drivers. And if I go back, we can see the filter is also executing on this controller. And if I click on post, just to make sure that it's running on both get and post, try it out. Driver name, let's say Charles Leclerc, and execute. We can see we got that response, and if I see here, it has been executed again. Okay, perfect. So now that I have done this, what we're going to be doing right now is we're going to be adding a much more advanced filter, and we're going to be seeing how we can actually it's not going to be really advanced, it's going to be the next step of the filters, and we're going to be actually seeing how we can attach this filter to controllers and actions individually. So let's get started. So inside my filters folder, I'm going to adding a new file, and I'm going to call this my action filter.ts. Perfect. So now that I have it, it's going to be similar to the other one. It's going to be private namespace. Namespace is going to be API filter demo dot configuration dot filters, and then here we're going to put public class my action filter, and then we're going to inherit from the action filter. Let us fix this. Perfect. And now it's going to complain again, similar to what we had before. We did not implement the interface. Okay. So let me just copy these. So it's going to be the same thing. And we're going to add more stuff to it. So the first item that we want to add is we want to be able to specify from which, this is an example here. So you don't have to basically add any specification here to make it work, but basically what we're doing here, we're going to basically add a variable where we can actually inject this into the filter whenever we are actually calling it, because it's going to be basically injected into different actions and different controllers. So for this, all I'm going to be doing here is I'm going to put a private read only I'm gonna say caller name, and in order for us to utilize it, we need to put inside the controller, and I'm gonna put, oops, I need to put here string, I forgot string, and here I'm gonna put string caller name, and here I'm gonna put underscore caller name equal caller name. Okay, and then once we do that, I'm just gonna print out this caller name. So here we have already string interpolation and executed on, and then let's add it here. And let's put the name here, and let's add it here as well. Okay, perfect. So now we should be able to see this filter name appear, whatever name may appear whenever this is executed. Okay, great. So if we take a look at this, we can see that this is similar, almost similar to what we had before, but with this in this current format, I'm not able to utilize it. Why? Because basically what we're doing here is we want to make this independent, or basically we want to attach this to certain controllers and actions. And in order for us to attach it to certain controllers and actions, what we need to do is we need to make it an attribute. And in order for us to make it an attribute, we need to basically inherit from the attribute class, and that will allow us to inject it. If we keep it at this current state without the attribute inheritance, it will not be able to work. So let us make it an attribute. So here we can just say we're gonna inherit from our attribute, put a comma, and that's it. And now we can actually make it an attribute. But in order for us to keep with the standard, we need to make sure that we call this my action filter attribute. You don't have to do this, it's just part of the standards, and we need to make sure that we're always following the standard. But if you don't put it, it will still also work. So now that I have this, now I'm gonna go back to my drivers controllers, and I'm gonna add this custom filter here. So first of all, I'm gonna try to add it into all of my controller. So I'm gonna add this, like similar to this, and let us fix this reference. And here what I'm gonna say is we have already specified a name. So all I'm gonna say here is this is gonna be my drivers controller. So this means that before it reaches the drivers controller, it's gonna actually execute this. So let's stop this. Let's do .NET build. And you have noticed here that we did not need to inject it into our program.cs, because basically what we're doing here is we're not actually enforcing it on every single controller. We have made it as an attribute based, and because we basically inherited from the attribute and we have attached it here to the, for example, to the controller, it should automatically be able to identify by our application. So we don't have to really insert it into the dependency instruction framework. So now that it's built successfully, all I'm going to be doing is put .NET build, actually .NET run, and basically it should run on the same port as before. So now let's go back to my application, to my web browser, sorry, and let's try this again, try it out. If we come back here, oh, didn't click on execute, sorry. Now it's executed, we're able to see the list. And here we can see that we have this filter is executed, which is going to be the first one. And then we went on to the other one, which is drivers controllers. This filter will be executed on executing, and then on action executed. And then we went back to the executed filter. So we can see here that first of all, the first filter that has been executed was this global filter that we have put, because this is, I'm going to put it here global. Because we have attached the first global filter on every single action and every single request which is going to be coming in. So this is going to be request global, because we have embedded this inside our DI container and inside the initialization of the controller. So this is going to take priority. So this is called a global filter, because we have added a global filter, and then we have specified an attribute based filter on every single that single controller, what I mean is basically we could see the global filter took first, executed first, and then it went to the controller attribute filter that we have added. It did the on executing, and then it did on the executed, and then because it finished, it went back up to the global controller. So it basically followed this U shape that we have seen here. So it means it's gonna come basically directly execute. For example, let's say we can call this the global filter, and then it execute below it. Here we can say the attribute filter, and then once it finished, it goes back on executed, and then it goes back on the global filter execution, and then goes back to the middleware. And that's really important. So when a request is coming in, it does not directly close. So once it goes to the global filter, it actually continue down to the other filters, and then it's execute the on executed. It does not execute the on executing and then on executed. No, it goes, it check all other filters, and then once those filter has been executed, then it goes back up. So that's something that we need to keep in mind. So now that we have seen this, and we can see how we can it actually works on the controller itself, let's make this a bit more challenging. And let us come back here, and let's take this and let's make this bit on the single action. So I'm gonna attach it to this action here, and I'm gonna say this is gonna be get drivers. And then let's stop this and see the level of execution here. So Ctrl C, dotnet run. And let's go back into my web browser here. Let's go back to Swagger, refresh, and let's make sure that we have attached it only to the get driver. We did not attach it to the add. So we can see here that this can only execute on this. So if we come here, try it out, executed, we can see that we got the response correctly. But if I come here, we can see that first of all, it went to the global filter, then it went to the driver's controller filter, then it went to the driver's action filter, it finished it up, and then basically it went to the driver's controller again, and then to the global filter. And this is the nice and the cool part about it, is basically it has the full circle of a lifespan whenever it comes to the filter management, and this is really cool. So now if I try to execute this on the driver ones, I try it out, and let's say here I want to add, let's say Charles Leclerc, and I click on execute. We can see here that Charles has been added successfully, but if I take a look at the actions, we can see it did not go to the action itself. It just stopped at the controller because it did not have that attribute filter injected to it. Perfect. That means that this is actually only being utilized within this filter. Perfect. Now let's stop this. And basically right now what we have done is we have discussed filters when it comes to global and when it comes to actually attribute based. There's also another types of filter, which is going to be the asynchronous filter. And the asynchronous filter here means that this action is going to be running asynchronously, similar to the name. And what we're going to be doing here is we're going to be implementing this asynchronous filter, and we're going to be seeing how the implementation actually differs from what we have done so far. So back into my folders, filters folder, I'm going to add a new file, and I'm going to call this my async action filter, because I'm going to make it also an attribute .ts. Yeah, it's a long name, but it actually illustrates exactly what I'm doing. So let's copy this, and again it's gonna be namespace API configurations filter. Perfect. And then we're gonna put public class, and this is gonna be it. And then we're gonna inherit from the attribute similar to what we have done before, and from the I action filter. Perfect. And now I need to fix this. Okay, so previously what we have done is we have inherited from the I action filter, but now we want to make this a bit more challenging. So I'm just gonna add this reference, but I'm gonna change it, and this here, it needs to be from the I async action filter. And now if we implement this interface, we can see that we only have one action. On the other hand, here we had two, on executing and on action executing and on action executed. On the other hand, for the asynchronous one, we have one on action execution anything. And this is going to be the difference, because here, as we can see, is we're having a context and we have the delegate. So what this means here is once we actually want to return that delegate back to the application itself, we're going to be actually able to control the before and after, and this is going to be the key part. So here we can see that within the delegate means that if we're running, again, this all goes back to the middlewares and how those works. So I really suggest you watch that video in order for you to get better understanding of all those delegates. But what I mean here is basically because, as we said, those actions and those filters and the middlewares, they're going to be running in orders, and basically the way they actually call each other is basically once the middleware finish, it actually send the request to the next one in the pipeline, and then the next one in the pipeline, and the next one to the pipeline, and they do this through delegation, and then once it finishes, it goes back up the chain similarly again. And here also, because it's an async, it's going to follow the same pattern. So here we can see that we have the delegate, and basically what we need to do is once we actually do any of the execution, we need to send it back to the next item in the list. And here, in order for us to just make sure that this is working, we can just remove this, and we can just put await underscore next. And what we mean by here await underscore next is we are actually just, okay, let's fix this parentheses. So what we're doing here is basically we are adding this to the next delegate, or basically we are sending this to the next delegate. So what we're doing next is we're basically attaching it to the next delegate. In order for us to actually have a similar to what we had here is on executing and on executed, it's going to be pretty straightforward. So I can say here console.writeLine. I can put this, okay, we can put async filter before execution, and if I copy this and put it here, we can say async filter after execution, or we can say here during execution, because it's going to be executing. And if you take a look, it's basically what we're doing is once before and one after, and as simple as that, because whenever we hit the delegate, it's going to go to any other filters which are in line in order for them to execute. And because of that, we can actually specify the before and after. So if I have another one on action executing async and I call it in line, let's add this so it will make more sense. So let me add this one here, and it's going to be pretty straightforward. Let me just copy this name. I'm just going to call it my action, my second, let's call it my second filter.cs. Pretty straightforward. I'm just gonna put the name here and then just copy everything of this one, and I'm just gonna call this my second. Okay, perfect. And what I'm gonna do also, I'm gonna inject a name here. So it's gonna put private read only string underscore caller name. Let's use a constructor. String caller name. And then here what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna put caller name equal caller name. And let's just copy this and put in the other one as well. Let's fix this. And let's append this. So I'm gonna put here, let's make this okay, perfect. So now I have done this. Let me add the same logic to the other one. Okay, And just to make it a bit more easier as well, what I'm going to be doing right now is, actually let's run it and then we can do that. So I'm just going to take this name of my attribute, and I'm going to go back to my driver's controllers. And we can see here that I have already attached this action to my driver's controller. So I'm just going to add this action as well here. And I'm going to call this get driver async. And what I'm going to also do is I'm going to get the other one, just so we can showcase what do we mean by next. And let's go back to the driver's controller. I'm going to also add this filter here. And I'm going to put this driver controllers 2. So we can see here now the order is going to be, first of all, it's going to execute the get driver action, my action filter attribute. Then it's going to execute the my action filter attribute, and then my second async action filter attribute. So we can see this is going to be the order that's going to be executing. So now if I run this application and I go back to my web browser and I refresh and go to drivers and try it out and execute, we got the response. And if we take a look here at the execution process, I'll make this a bit bigger. So we can see here that the way it actually worked, first it went to the global, and then it went to the get driver actions, and then it went to the get driver async. So this is the first one. And then because we put the await.next, it went to the second one, and then it completed the second one, and then it went back to the action filter, and then it went back to the my action filter, and then it went back to the global ones. Yeah, and then once it did all of that, then it went to the controller and went to the global one. So what we can see here is ordering is very important, and basically the way we actually stack these attributes on top of one another is very important. And we can see here that the A action, the async await is basically, is the async next is allowing us to actually delegate or basically send a request from one to another. And this is really important. If we actually try to add an attribute without adding the await next inside our code, it will not actually work, because basically the request is going to stop there and there's nowhere else for it to go. But because we have added it, it will be able to communicate with different attributes, or basically different filters, and then from there it will be able to continue the request. So before we jump into our last part, which is going to be orders, I'm just going to go back to my web browser here quickly, and I'm going to go to draw.io. And I'm just going to quickly illustrate what I mean by this. So let's make it a bit bigger. Let's see how it looks. Okay, I think that should be fine. So basically the order is going to be something similar to this. So first we're going to have a global. Oops, I'm not sure what happened there. Okay, not sure what happened. Let's zoom in again. Okay, this is very flimsy. Okay. So this is going to be our global. And then that's going to be on the controller. And then this is going to be on the action itself. So normally what's going to be happening is it's going to have something similar to this. Let's put a different line. So the request is going to come in. It's going to go through the global all the way down. It's going to execute. It's going to continue its execution basically. And then it's going to make its way all the way back up. And let's give this as a line. So basically the requests come in this way. It went to the global one, it showed it. It went to the controller, it showed it. The action one, it showed it, and then it went back up. So if you want to expand this a bit further, let's make this a bit bigger. So inside the action one, let's remove this from here, and we'll add text here so we can say this is the action one. So here what happened is we had different ones embedded in it. So inside the action one, if we go back to our source code, we had my action attribute. So that's going to be one of the first one. Oof, that's really big. Now let's put it here, and then yeah, so that's going to be the first one, my action attribute. And then the other one was my action filter async. So let's go back here. Let's make this a bit bigger. And lastly, it's gonna be my second one. So again, okay. So these are the 3 filters that exist inside my action. And what happened, okay, let's make this a bit bigger. It needs to be a bit more bigger than this. Excuse my drawing skills. So now let's make this all the way big like that, and let's make it big like that. So right now what happened is these extra, or basically these attributes, went into the same level of order of execution. So here we can see that whenever the request came in, it went here to the controller, which we actually gave it the name of my action filter on the controller itself. So inside the controller here, we actually gave it the same action filter. And this controller. And lastly, what we did, we give it for the program was yes, my filter. Let's put it here. Because all of them are same width and height, so we can understand how they're same width at least. Okay. So that's what happened. Actually, it's going to be global. So what happened here is this order. The request came in. First, it went to the global one. Once it executed my filter on the global one, it executed only on one way, which is coming in. Then it went to the controller. It executed the one on controller also only in one way, which is coming in. And then once it showed that, it went to the actions. And inside the action, it executed, first of all, my action filter, my async action filter, and the second async action filter. And then basically once it did that, it executed whatever it needed to execute. So we can say here logic inside the action. Let's make it blue. Let's send it back. And once it executes this, it went back up. So again, it went to the whatever is after it. So on executed now, on executed, and then it went back up a level to the controller, on executed, on executed, on executed. So that's the item that we want to think of. It's basically those ordering structure is basically going to be on where do actually exist. But lucky for us as well that within our filtering process, what we can do is we can actually specify our custom order. And basically once we actually want to specify our custom order, it means that we can actually force dotnet inside our application to prioritize one filter over the other. So let's see how that will work. So right now what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to going back to my source code. I'm going to stop this. And basically what I'm going to be doing is inside my action async filter, I'm just going to add an extra new attribute. And this attribute is going to be called the order filter. And this is going to complain because it's going to require implementation. So let's implement it. And if we go down, we can see that actually added an integer for us, which is called order. And what we can do is we can actually, let's make this a bit smaller. And what we can do in order for us to utilize this, it's also pretty straightforward. So let's remove this from here. Let's put it up next to this. And let's give this a getter and a setter. And I'm gonna add this one here, string, actually int. I'm gonna give it an order and I'm gonna equal to 0, and then I'm gonna put here order equal order. Perfect. So now wherever I have my async action filter, what I can do is, what I can do after this is I can go back to my controller that I have created here, and it was my async action filter. Yeah. So where it does that, my async action filter, I can just do this. I can now give it an order. So the way that we need to think of the order, the lower the number is the higher priority. So here we can see the default is 0. So if I give it 10, it's higher, so it does not really have out of priority. But if I give it -10, for example, and I execute this, let's see what happens now. It's actually building and it's ran. So now let's go back to my web browser here. Let's go back here. Let's refresh this and let's get the get. And let's click on execute. We got our information, and now let's go back here. So what happened here? So we can see that the global one executed. Then we have seen the driver's action. Then we have seen the get driver action executed, which is going to be this one. And then we got the get driver async to, get driver action, and then driver's controller filter is executed, and then get driver async action. So we can see here that the first one that ever happened is actually before the execution was get driver async. So instead of being global, the first one which execute, and the last one to execute, it was the get driver async, because this one got a priority. So if I go back here, and go back to this graph, so what happened here is I gave this priority, this action a priority, and now what happened is this one moved all the way from here to here. And because I gave this priority now, it went through this before it actually hit the global. And if I, for example, I change this from -10 to 10, and I execute this again, and I run it. And if I go back here and I click on execute again, and if I take a look at this one right now, we can see here that get driver async was the last one got executed directly, even though the ordering for it should be get driver async too, but because we gave it a lower priority, it executed this over this first. So basically what happened here is, because I gave it a lower priority, even though its actual order was here, it actually moved it down here because the priority was different, even though the ordering for it was here. So that way it basically means that ordering is really important if we have really crucial implementation like authorization, header management, so on and so forth. And basically here we can see how filters play a crucial role in actually managing our application. So if we do a quick recap of what we have covered today. So first of all, what we have covered is how we can actually implement simple filters on a global level, how we implemented filter on a controller level, on an action level, how we can actually implement async filters, and then how we can actually manipulate the order of this filter execution. And we can see here every single one of them have specific use cases and rule. And I hope this video was helpful. Please like, share, and subscribe if you like it. to really have that channel as well. If you'd like to support me, please consider supporting me on Patreon or buying me a coffee. Now, if you have any extra questions or anything that you would like me to delve into more details, please put them in the comments down below. Have a great day.